everyone, welcome to Study with Sudhir. This is your digital classroom and my name is Sudhir. जी हाँ, आज हम पढ़ने वाले हैं CBSE 10वीं कक्षा की पुस्तक फर्स्ट फ्लाइट की एक कविता और उस कविता का नाम है A Tiger in the Zoo. A Tiger in the Zoo is the name of the poem written by Leslie Norris and this is part of the CBSE Class 10 English syllabus from the first flight textbook. It's a short poem but something which you will be able to connect very deeply, and that's probably also because you would have seen a zoo and you would have gone to the tiger cage. Many of us feel extremely fascinated by what we see, the royal tiger, बाघ जिसको कहते हैं, शेर लायन को कहते हैं हिंदी में. तो अगर आप लायन का हिंदी रूप अनुवाद करके शेर बोलेंगे वो ठीक होगा, लेकिन टाइगर का हिंदी अनुवाद बाघ होता है. ओके, सो लेट्स नॉट गेट कंफ्यूज्ड, मोस्ट ऑफ अस डू यूजुअली. So this is a poem in which Leslie Norris talks about a tiger in the zoo and contrasts and compares it with the tiger in its natural wild habitat. कि जंगल में जब बाघ रहता है, टाइगर रहता है, तो उसका रवैया किस तरह से रहता है और उसके कॉन्ट्रास्ट में जब एक चिड़ियाघर के एक केज के अंदर जब टाइगर रहता है उसका रवैया कैसा रहता है, उसके बारे में यह कविता है जो कि लेस्ली नॉरिस ने लिखी है. ओके, तो शुरुआत करें. आई होप यू हैव योर बुक्स इन फ्रंट ऑफ यू. आई विल कीप गोइंग बिटवीन इंग्लिश एंड हिंदी सो दैट आई कैन एड्रेस बोथ कंस्टिट्यूएंसीज who are comfortable understanding in English, especially students from South India, from parts of East India. But for students who are more comfortable understanding in Hindi, उनके लिए मैं हिंदी में भी इस कविता को समझाता रहूंगा ताकि दोनों constituencies खुश रहें. Okay, so please bear with me. Don't get unnecessarily worked up about it. Okay, he stalks in his vivid stripes. Vivid stripes जो बाघ के ऊपर the kind of lines that you see over the tiger's skin surface, जिस तरह के bright orange and black color stripes रहते हैं उसको vivid कहा गया है. Vivid is something which is very striking, right? So he stalks the few steps of his cage. Now stalking is what? Stalking, of course, when girls are stalked, especially it is used in a negative kind of a sense. And here the word stalks, the verb stalks has been used by Leslie Norris in the sense of, जो cage कितना बड़ा होगा tiger का? Not very big, maybe an 8x8 kind of a cage normally to take care of his size, depending also on the size of the tiger, or sometimes a 6x6 kind of a cage. So in that kind of a narrow kind of space, he has to go from here, come back, go from here, come back. So it's almost like, stalking the cage, it's a very concentrated kind of walking because the area is extremely limited. जगह की कमी है तो उस जगह पर एक तरह से घूमता रहता है बाघ because he cannot move out, unlike a tiger in the wild for who it is the entire jungle, it can be his domain, right? He stalks in his vivid stripes the few steps of his cage. So the description is about the tiger inside the cage at a zoo on pads of velvet quiet. Now the paw of a tiger, in case if you have ever seen it or at least you would have seen some photographs, it's almost like velvet, it's soft kind of a thing, the paw of the tiger. And the pad, the नीचे का जो surface area है, in his quiet rage. Now quiet rage is an interesting phrase because rage means what? Extreme anger, बहुत ज़्यादा क्रोध, गुस्सा. लेकिन even though he is very angry, he is quiet. He's not making a song and dance about it. He's not kind of, shaking up the cage. He's angry because of that limited space in which he has to live his life, and there is rage inside him, but it does not manifest itself in any kind of loud roars, which would be an expression of anger. But there is a quiet rage. Quiet rage is also a bit of an oxymoron, जो एक poetic device use किया गया है, जिसके बारे में हम last में discuss करेंगे. Okay. Now, basically, it's a limited space that I spoke about. The stripes on his body, which are extremely prominent, very, very noticeable, and he is silent but definitely very angry, and the reason for his anger is the limited space inside his cage. He should be lurking in shadow. Now he takes us to the other tiger who would be, or normally how a tiger should be out there in the jungle. He should be lurking in shadow. Now tigers, when they are looking for prey, they are extremely stealthy. When they walk also on the grass, you cannot hear the sound at all. The prey will not be able to notice that a tiger is lurking. Lurking is in a very stealthy kind of a manner in shadow, and they move around in the shadow of the grass ताकि prey को पता नहीं चले कि उनका शिकार होने वाला है. Sliding through long grass. Okay, so he'll hide along the grass near the water hole where plump deer pass. Now, in a jungle, normally there will be a bit of a water hole, जहाँ पे थोड़ा सा तालाब, pond, where the different kinds of animals, from monkeys to deers to tigers to lions to different kinds of animals, would come there to quench their thirst. तो वहाँ पे जब हिरन, which is a prey for the tiger, would come to quench its thirst at the pond, and the deer is plump. It's been described as plump because it's now going to be preyed upon by the tiger. So he is lurking in the shadows to attack and take that plump deer by surprise. He should be snarling around houses. Beg your pardon. He should be snarling around houses at the jungle edge. Now, काफी सारे जंगलों के आसपास घर होते हैं किसानों के, or people who do some kind of agriculture. There will be some kind of other kind of occupation that they would be indulging in. So he says, the poet is saying that he should be somewhere in that area, trying to establish his presence and scaring even the people who live in those houses, right? Snarling, again an expression of irritation and anger. Okay, at the jungle's edge, the houses which are at the edge of the jungle, bearing his white fangs. Now, fangs is normally a word which is associated with snakes, but here it has been used in the context of a tiger. Okay, bearing his white fangs, his claws terrorizing the village. So the poet is quite okay if the tiger is also scaring the villagers who are there on the periphery of the jungle. So he says that's the way a tiger in a jungle in the wild ought to be. But look at the life that he is leading in that limited space of a cage, which he has described in the first stanza. Okay. And he also is trying to make the point that the tiger, when he's in the cage, he's at the mercy of the zookeeper who feed him at regular intervals. Unlike the jungle, where he actually has to hunt for himself, he takes care of himself. He's in that sense self-sufficient. He takes care of himself. But here, he is a victim of cruelty in a sense, because he has to depend only when the zoo officials, the zookeeper, decide that this is the time for him to be fed something, only then he will be fed anything. Okay. So that's a difference between a natural habitat, that's a jungle, and the artificial habitat, the artificial home of the zoo. Okay. Then the third stanza we have already kind of explained, and the fangs and the claws are kind of expressions of the prowess of a tiger. कि बाघ के पास किस तरह के हथियार हैं लोगों को डराने के लिए या अपना शिकार ढूंढने के लिए. The fangs and the claws. The fangs, as in the canines in the teeth, the sharp teeth with which he can kind of attack and tear apart a deer or any other prey. Fourth stanza, but he is locked in a concrete cell. So now he is coming back to the tiger inside the zoo, but is locked in a concrete cell. Concrete is essentially built of cement, and which is very hard kind of thing, not easy to break. Cell as in the prison cage, the zoo cage. His strength behind bars, stalking the length of his cage, ignoring visitors. So once again he has used the word stalking, the length of his cage. Stalking is in length of the cage pe aage piche. He is constantly walking, and his strength behind the bars is obviously greatly diminished because he is imprisoned in that sense. Ignoring visitors. The visitors would be very excited to see him, like you and I would be whenever we go to a zoo, but he is not the least interested in looking at the visitors. So he is completely ignoring all those people who have come to see him at the zoo. He hears the last voice at night, the patrolling cars. So look at the kind of different kind of life that a tiger inside a zoo leads. There he, in the second stanza, the poet uses a word like lurking in the shadow, complete silence when he's going to attack. But here inside the city, while he's at the zoo, the sound he hears late in the night is that of patrolling cars. So it's a very artificial and an environment that he ideally should not be, and an environment he does not really belong to where he is, because he hears the sound of patrolling cars. Those are not the sounds he would ever hear inside a jungle, and stares with his brilliant eyes at the brilliant stars. So he has compared the eyes to the stars and says both are equally brilliant, and he stares at them. So there is a connection that is made between the tiger's eyes, which are brilliant, with the stars, which also shine in a brilliant way. Okay, so the tiger is essentially imprisoned. That's what the fourth stanza essentially talks about, and he has no interest in looking at the visitors, but he keeps on walking in the limited space that he has inside the cage, right? He is again spoken about in the fourth and fifth stanza about the tiger in the cage, and basically the poem is making a strong case against animals being kept inside a zoo. There are a lot of animal rights activists who have spoken about how zoos are not the natural way to keep animals. That's not the way we need to educate our children about animals, because their behavior inside a zoo is very different from the behavior they would have inside a jungle. In fact, just to digress a bit, I can tell you, because I have covered zoos and animal life to a large extent in my career as a journalist. Basically, what animal rights activists and people who understand wildlife say is that, suppose for instance, if an animal like a tiger is kept inside a zoo for say a year, 2 years, and then in case if you decide to release it into the wild, that particular tiger will never be able to adapt and actually be able to survive inside the jungle. In fact, he would get killed by other animals, in fact even by other tigers. He or she will not be able to survive in the jungle, because he is used to too much of the very protective environment of the zoo. So what basically the argument made is that when you put a carnivorous hunter with the tendencies of a hunter animal like tiger, ऐसे एक जानवर को आप चिड़ियाघर के अंदर बंद कर देते हैं, तो आप उसकी नेचुरल टेंडेंसीज को कर्ब करते हैं. यू आर कर्बिंग एंड अफेक्टिंग द नेचुरल हंटिंग एबिलिटीज एंड टेंडेंसीज एंड इंस्टिंक्ट ऑफ अ टाइगर टू लुक आफ्टर इटसेल्फ बाय एक्चुअली डोमेस्टिकेटिंग हिम. आपने एक तरह से उसको पालतू जानवर की तरह बना दिया है, द वे वी हैव डॉग्स एंड कैट्स एट होम, राइट, हु विल बी फेड एट अ पर्टिकुलर टाइम ऑफ द डे एंड नाइट. आप टाइगर के साथ भी उसी तरह का रवैया अपना रहे हैं. दैट इज द पॉइंट दैट मेनी एनिमल राइट्स एक्टिविस्ट एसेंशियली मेकिंग ए केस कि चिड़ियाघर में किसी भी जंगली जानवर को रखा नहीं जाना चाहिए. बट दिस डिबेट हैज बीन ऑन फॉर मेनी इयर्स नाउ. उसका कोई रेजोल्यूशन हुआ नहीं है. सो दैट इज एज फार एज दी story is concerned. Now, what are the kind of questions that you could possibly get? Why is a tiger walking in the cage like that? What does it mean by the word stalks? Why is in quiet rage? Then the question about where the tiger ideally should be. So you need to talk about the life of a tiger inside the jungle. How does he react to the visitors? How does the tiger feel inside the cage? How does the tiger terrify the villagers? Those are the kind of questions that you would normally get. Now let's look at some of the poetic devices, because आप सभी को poetic devices कौन कौन से यूज किए गए हैं उसका जानना, उसके बारे में जानकारी रखना काफी आवश्यक है. ओके, पहला एक तो है ऑक्सीमोरॉन, जिसके मैंने जिक्र किया, क्वाइट रेज, दैट्स वन ऑक्सीमोरॉन दैट हैज बीन यूज्ड. देन देयर इज समथिंग कॉल्ड एलिट्रेशन. नाउ अगर आप सेकंड स्टैंजा को देखें, सो देयर इज in the last line of the second stanza, where plump deer pass, plump pass, दोनों में the alphabet P has been used quite close to each other, giving you a sense of emphasis out there. फर्स्ट स्टैंजा को देखें, यहां पे एक दूसरा पोएटिक डिवाइस यूज किया गया है जिसका कि नाम है enjambed. ENJAMBMENT. इसका मतलब क्या होता है कि you continue the sentence straight away without really giving much of a pause. He stalks in his vivid stripes the few steps of his cage on pads of velvet quiet in his quiet rage. आप देखें तो ये एक पूरे वाक्य की तरह है, even though it has been broken down into 4 sentences in the first stanza, but it actually has a natural flow of its own that is known as enjambment. The other interesting thing which the poet has used is that he has used which is known as the humanification. The tiger, the animals को normally it के तौर पे refer किया जाता है. We refer to them as it, but in this particular case, he has referred to it as he throughout this particular poem. So that's an interesting thing. It's a humanification of the tiger. It's almost as if the poet Leslie Norris is using him as talking about him as a human being. So those are some of the poetic devices that have been used. The imagery, that's another one which has been used very, this thing, lurking in shadow. You know, it's almost like giving you a visual imagery of it, how a tiger would be camouflaging himself, अपने आप को छुपाते हुए in the shadow, playing with the dark, having a very good understanding of how he should actually hide in the shadows, in the darkness, before he can mount an attack on his prey, which in this case is the plump deer. So those are the imagery, plump deer sliding through the long grass, you know, those are kind of creating a visual imagery of the preparation for an attack by the tiger that has been used by Leslie Norris out here. Then what are the other kind of thing? Brilliant का मैंने already जिक्र किया, you know, basically referring to his shining eyes. So those are some of the poetic devices that have been used in this particular poem. Please go through this poem, look at the questions also. We'll of course discuss the questions closer to the examination. Examination शुरू होने से पहले प्रश्नों के उत्तर देने की कोशिश करेंगे. उस समय तब तक आपने रिवाइज भी कर लिया होगा तो ज़्यादा आसानी होगी आपको सब समझने में. तो अभी आप इस पोएम को फिर से एक बार देख लीजिए, जो की वर्ड्स हैं उसको आप अंडरलाइन कर लीजिए. That will really help you in understanding this poem very well. It's a simple poem but of course has a larger and deeper meaning that connects to all of us. We'll continue to do the entire class 10 English syllabus from both Footprints Without Feet as well as First Flight. In fact, quite a few of the lessons के video lessons already published हैं. Playlist CBSE class 10 English में जाके click कीजिए, वहाँ पर आपको सभी मिल जाएंगे. So please go through that. I do believe that there is quality explanation of each one of the poem, not just giving you a word by word, line by line explanation, but also putting it nicely in the overall context. आपको समझाने में मजा भी आया और मुझे उम्मीद है कि आपको समझने में भी काफी मजा आएगा. I hope you will enjoy the poems and the stories. A very fine collection in both First Flight and Footprints Without Feet. Thank you very much for watching. Like, share, comment and subscribe to Study with Sudhir. Thank you.